Yeah. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BetTALker podcast. Today, apart from Duncan, our founder, we have our friend Mark Potter. If you have worked in the safer gambling scene, you surely know him, you know, on his previous role and also in his actual role. But let's let Mark to introduce himself. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Pedro. Thanks. How are you? And hello to you as well, Duncan. I'm pretty good. Just sat in the UK. The weather's nice for a change. So yeah, all is well in the weird and wonderful world of the gambling industry at the moment.
Oh, you're more optimistic than me.
Yeah.
Gonna paint a nice picture for you here, guys.
Sometimes it feels a bit like the wacky races.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it can. It can, and there's a lot going on. But you'd like to think that at some point we will start to make some progress, and we'll see how it goes. I'm sure we'll cover some of those nice topics as part of this chat.
Definitely, definitely. For those that they don't know you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you end up, you know, in your current role?
It's a long story, that, Pedro. So
we have time. We have time.
As a lot of people know, I obviously I attended Sporting Chance Clinic Rehabilitation Centre in 2013. That was after a long and arduous road, understanding my relationship with gambling effectively, alongside playing competitive sport, which many of those factors played a part in my ultimate need for support. So just to go back to that, I think ultimately anybody who's involved in sport to any level will understand the kind of competitive nature of it. I was absolutely the same. When I started to play sort of high level sport at 18, 19, with sort of gambling club at my sports club. Previous to that, I didn't really have any relationship with betting. And as soon as I were around that kind of grown men, most of them earning more money than I was introduced to sort of how the real world lived, and that involved obviously going out on weekends, having a few beers, and we had a betting club, which was a Thursday afternoon, which we'd all go down and sort of pool £20 each together with. And it was kind of like a team bonding thing. And do you know what? I absolutely loved it. That was kind of my introduction to horse racing and sports, which was kind of my thing. That was a really enjoyable thing. Then it coincided with things like injuries and team selections and certain issues, kind of family wise, and got kind of a long-term injury. I had my knee done. I had an issue with my neck, and I was out for sort of 12 or 14 months, and that I found that really hard. And I was looking for other things to fill the time, fill the void of what I wasn't getting from sport. Wasn't around all the boys all the time, which I really liked and sort of needed. And I looked to sort of betting on horse racing to kind of fill a bit of that void. Low level at first, passed the time pretty well. And then one day I won a lot of money on a horse. I turned sort of £50 into 15,000 almost, 14,000 and something. And that basically set the trajectory for the rest of my sort of gambling journey, because it increased all of my want and will to do it again. The adrenaline and buzz I got from winning was insane. It was giving me what I didn't get at the time out of sport, and effectively had a lot of money in my betting account. And while that was great for a period of time because I could afford to bet what I wanted, what the next sort of 6 months did was create a kind of really unsustainable sort of trajectory to it, because I started to literally overnight go from a £2 and £3 punter on horses and football to a £200 and £300 punter on the same, because I had the money. The money was there. It was no financial risk, no issue, no danger to it. Also, I thought, and I was spending their money, and that got me into a cycle of spending more money on more products and more things. And inevitably, when the money ran out and I had to go back to spending my own sort of salary, which at the time was just under 20 grand, £200 and £300 bets on horses suddenly become pretty unsustainable. However, the problem lay is I'd got used to a level of play and a level of buzz and level of adrenaline that was hard to give up. And I didn't want to give that up. So I didn't. I started to spend more than I could afford, putting 200 or 300 a day into my betting account as opposed to 10 and 15, what I normally did. And obviously, very quickly, I would run out of money. I would then start borrowing money off my teammates, my friends, my family. And then obviously on payday, you're paying people back and started to run out of money quicker and quicker. And that led on a quite a long cycle of then accessing credit to be able to gamble with, and loans, credit cards, etc. came in. And I started to get into debt more heavily over time. Coincided with sort of meeting my wife who lived in Ireland. And she got pregnant. We had twin boys that I wasn't ready for at the time. I think that's it. I've been pretty open about that. I could barely look after myself at that point at 25 years of age. And I moved away. I moved away from the UK to Ireland. Lucky enough to find a reasonable rugby gig over there, and a job on the side, and started kind of my new life with a view of getting out of the situation that I'd got myself into, which ultimately was at 25 years of age, I was 80 grand in debt to credit cards and loans, and left to move to my new life in Ireland with literally not a penny to my name, to the point that I couldn't even afford a bottle of water on my Ryanair flight when I moved. And I moved over there and things started off okay, and had the intention of sort of changing my lifestyle because I had to. I had a partner and kids now, and responsibilities. But very slowly but surely, the sort of will to have a bet crept up on me again. And I did, with a view to doing it at a low level, which lasted for a short period of time. I won a few €100 on a football accumulator. I was back up and running, put the money, the winnings into a betting account, and started the whole process again. And that led to any number of poor decisions from me, around unpayment of bills, hiding my behaviours from my partner, to the point that I was paying the postman €250 a month to not put mail through my door. I was meeting him about a mile away from where I lived, and he kept my mail in an elastic band, and I paid him, and I every day sifted through the mail, and anything that was incriminating, pay slips, bank statements, betting statements, just got put in the bin, because I didn't want anything to go through my door that would have caught me out. Alongside playing sport and alongside kind of me trying to hide the debt that I was creating for my partner and kids, I never felt comfortable with it all. It was always, I thought I was supposed to be portraying certain type of behaviour as kind of somebody who's playing sport to a high level. And I didn't associate the kind of shame and being broke alongside that of being successful. And I never wanted people to know that. So that played a massive part in kind of how I kept everything a secret. And it came to a point where I couldn't pay my mortgage. I stole money from my employer, cashed checks to me from him, forged his signature to get myself out of trouble. As you can imagine, at the time, I thought I was doing the right thing. My decision-making processes and moral compass had completely gone by that stage due to my sort of behaviours. And I genuinely thought I was borrowing it off him, and it was my intention to pay him back. That, as you know, didn't happen. I lost a significant amount more. I ended up getting arrested, getting charged with theft and fraud and forgery, going to court, all completely unbeknownst to my wife. It then came out in the press And that's how she found out, which, as you can imagine, for any normal, sane human being, didn't go down very well. I got kicked out. I lost my contract. I lost my job. Had to move back to the UK, and anybody would think that would probably make people want to stop gambling, but unfortunately not for me. I was going through the court case, and all of the time I got a solicitor. And because I'd mentioned betting as a problem when we started to go through the reasons why I did what I did, I was advised to get some betting statements to kind of showcase the severity of what I was talking about. And the day of my sentencing, I went with my dad, and I'd never once before that day checked or understood how much I was doing. And I got my statements read out in court, and it was 476 pages, I think, from 12 months worth of my bets. And it accumulated to, I gambled in the last 12 months before my arrest, £1.61 million. I'd lost 180 something thousand pounds, which was more than £100,000 more than I earned. The reality of that is every penny I ever earned, I gave to the bookmakers. Every penny I won, which was significant over time, I gave back to the bookmakers. Every penny I borrowed and stole, I gave back to the bookmakers. And I avoided prison because of that. The judge said he couldn't believe how it's humanly possible to be able to gamble that kind of money and lose that kind of money based on what I was earning, and effectively kept me out of prison. I went to see my wife then after 5 or 6 months of not seeing her or the kids, which was terrible. And people always talk about the money, I guess, in when there's gambling harm involved. But for me, that's kind of the very bottom of the issues that I was creating. I effectively missed my daughter's birth, which was terrible. And the hardship I caused my parents and my wife and family was terrible. I'd lost relationships with friends because of it, and lost contracts because of it, lost jobs because of it. I think all of those kind of things are the more difficult things to deal with. And I went back to the UK after my sentencing, and wife came over, sort of gave me a second chance. And for 6 months, I was doing everything I could to kind of keep myself in check. Didn't want to gamble, wanted to prove a point that I didn't need to do it anymore. And then she went home for the weekend to see her parents in Ireland, took the kids, and I just couldn't help myself but to do it. At that point, I didn't know how to behave. I didn't know how to recover. I didn't know how to understand my triggers and behaviours. And I just couldn't give up the ability to be able to sit on my own couch, watch my own TV and bet on horses when she was away. And I did it, and I sold property of ours and hers, including engagement rings, including PlayStations and my kids' toys for something like £500. And I lost it all. And that was the first time ever, after I lost it all, that I ever thought, this is not for me, I want to stop. All the times before that, there was always a reason to carry on. And to be honest, I think part of the conversations we have now when I go and do education programs in sport or with betting operators is, for me, there was always a reason not to stop, because I think gambling is different than other addictions like drugs or alcohol, for example. With betting, because I'd had previous success and I knew I could win, I always thought it could solve my problems. All I needed to do was have my one day in the sun, which I'd already experienced, and problems are solved. That is different than many other issues around addiction. And that kept me going for such a long time, to the point that I think I had to get to the very bottom where there was no other way to go before I wanted to stop. And for me, that was that day. And problem was I didn't know how to deal with it, didn't know how to address the situation. I'd already caused an awful lot of trouble for everybody. And the only way I could think of to not essentially have to deal with that was the day before they came back. I drove down the road and sat on a train station bridge and tried to psych myself up to jump off. And not because I wanted to, it was because I didn't know how to deal with the scenario that I created. And I also didn't know how I could ever stop, because anytime I ever had access to money, all I ever thought about was going for a punt. And I think I couldn't see a way that that would ever change. And I was really, really lucky. A, that I went to see my parents instead of doing what I was setting out to do. B, they're very understanding and forgiving people. And C, they wanted to help, but they didn't know how to. And I was really lucky I had access to Sport and Chance Clinic because of my connections to sport and rugby. The Rugby Players Association essentially paid for my treatment. Sport and Chance Clinic, I went there for 5 weeks, got counselling, psychotherapy, all the things I needed to get to better understand why I did what I did. And I think that's part of the main conversation we kind of need to have, is most of the reasons why I did what I did were directly related to who I was and what I was. A, in terms of a competitive person through sport, because sport is all about success or failure, right? It's all about winning or losing. When I started to gamble, I won, feeling incredible. When I started to lose, hated the feeling of being a loser. And actually, there was never a scenario where I thought, do you know what? I'm not very good at this. I need to stop. My solution was, I need to practice at this, get better at it, and become more successful at it. And that kept me going. And then I won loads of money when I was 19. I didn't have a clue what that meant. Thought it was the greatest day of my life. Probably the worst, because it created the scenario that kind of set the path off for all of the rest of the terrible things that went on. Then stopped using it for what it was supposed to be, fun and enjoyment, and kind of as a hobby. And it became about replicating the buzz of how good it felt to win money or escaping the things that weren't going very well. And then life events start to happen. And then going through to Sport and Chance, I realised I had ADHD. So all of these things that I didn't previously know and understand suddenly became more understandable to me, which in turn, as I moved forward into recovery, helped other people around me become more understanding too. And I think that's a big thing around addiction. It's very rarely to do with, for me, the product or marketing or advertising. For me, it was all about who I was, what I was, the circumstances and environments that I found myself in, and the lack of awareness and understanding around all of these triggers in how my behaviours changed over time. Alongside that, having ADHD, and in terms of my decision-making ability and my moral compass, the further I got into my sort of gambling disorder, it almost made it impossible to stop without accessing real fit-for-purpose treatment. But I was really lucky to have that, and I got that. And fortunately enough, a few months after coming out of Sport and Chance, I got the opportunity to speak to some of the rugby players and sort of share my experiences. And then by hook or by crook, ended up working with Paul Buck at Epic Risk Management, it was at the time. Went on to be Epic Global Solutions. And then for 9 years, I ended up doing education, training programs, consultancy, ended up being head of delivery and kind of running all of the programs that we ran at Epic. Started to work in the USA, and 9 years was good. It was long, and there were a lot of good stuff involved in that, and I really enjoyed it. Probably came the time last year that I needed to kind of decompress and step away and do something different, because 9 years is such a long time to spend doing anything. So I left and took a little break, and then got the opportunity to work with IC360, which is different. Obviously, it's a global integrity solution, but still involved in the provision of training programs and education programs for college athletes and operators and sports clubs. Still based in the UK, doing a lot of the European and sort of foreign markets outside of the USA, alongside kind of Dan, who does a lot of the USA stuff with Ryan. Are you enjoying it? And I guess the last sort of 12 months has allowed me to get more involved in sort of what's going on in the current space around the RET around kind of things like horse racing and to better understand the sort of intricacies and narratives around that. And been doing some work with Jordan Lee at Deal Me Out and kind of getting involved in other things alongside the sort of great stuff that I'm doing alongside IC360, building relationships over here for them and being able to kind of partner with some good organizations. And hopefully, as we come back to it, and I know you guys have experienced that, is navigate the complexities of what is currently quite a difficult scenario in the UK. So we found our way here by a hook or by crook, via ways that I wouldn't recommend normal people doing in the same way, but actually probably in many ways don't regret some of the things that happened, because I really enjoy working in this industry, and I think helping it to try and be more sustainable and get better, more understanding of everybody, including regulators, operators, customers. And I think trying to find balance in terms of what's best for all of those, as you know, can be quite difficult, but it's also quite engaging. And it's something I'm quite passionate about to keep doing for the next few years yet. And probably why I'm sat here talking to you guys. Yeah, that's a very long and short-winded version of how I got to where I got to. But yeah, hopefully helping people along the way, and there we go.
Sorry, if you saw me typing while you were talking there, Mark, it was because I was taking a few notes. I made a conscious decision that I didn't want to interrupt you. That was quite a raw and vulnerable account of what you've been through. Thank you for sharing that. But yeah, there were certain points in your story that kind of resonated. Firstly, I would comment that again and again when we speak to people that have volunteered to share their journey through gambling harm with us, that actually quite often the money isn't what they regret the most. It's not the crux of their pain in this. It's the lost and damaged relationships, and I very much got the feeling that was the case with you when you started talking about your not seeing your children for 6 months. That must have been extremely difficult. And I think it's very easy with the sort of tabloid headlines that we see today, the press coverage of gambling addiction, to think that it's all about the figure lost. And when you focus on the money lost, you ignore the person at the center of the story, and you lose sight of the trauma that they've experienced in going through this. So yeah, I mean, I see that again and again. Nobody's ever deeply wounded by the money. They regret the money, and it's caused problems in their life, but that's not where the wound is. I was also thinking specifically about your relationship with sports, and I wanted to maybe explore your thoughts on that, because certainly from an external perspective and not a lived experience perspective in either sports or harm, I wonder whether there are cultural aspects to being part of a sporting social group that encourage people towards competitiveness, obviously, but risk-taking behavior, and perhaps for lack of a less in vogue way to say it, sort of a toxic masculinity to that sort of competition, and that sort of egging each other on and having to be seen as the winner and the big man. Do you would you agree with those statements, or do you think that's a misunderstanding or misconception?
Do you know what? I do agree with those statements. I'd probably give a couple of examples of that. Is look, I mean, sport gives a lot of things to a lot of people, and team sport especially teaches you an awful lot of good. I think there is, however, obviously in elite sport now, if we just address that one first, it's so professional that if you look at back pages, front pages of the papers, especially high-end footballers, essentially can't do anything without being in the press, especially anything that young men would probably like to be doing at sort of early 20 years of age. So alcohol, drugs, going out enjoying themselves at the weekend and meeting girls, all of those kind of things are basically taboo now, essentially most of the time for elite athletes. So gambling almost becomes the one thing that you can still do. Obviously, there's some integrity caveat to that, and part of what we do at advocacy to protect the integrity of sport. But outside of that, it's a very appealing thing for sports men and women to kind of get involved in. It gives you a lot of what you get from sport in terms of competitiveness, adrenaline. All of those things are very similar in terms of gambling and sports. And obviously the connectivity between gambling and sport is massive. So you are spot on. I think for my example is, and the toxic masculinity that I probably felt was when I was really struggling, when I was in loads of debt, when I needed some help and support, and when I needed to better understand what was going on. I never felt comfortable speaking to anybody in that environment about it, because it was always about how that might come across as weak. It might come across as a way that it might impact my team selection or any contract. So for me, there was always a reason not to say anything. Now, don't get me wrong, that was quite a long time ago now, and I think mental health has changed a lot and people are more prepared to talk about that. But I think there is an element of masculinity around sport still that makes people reluctant to talk about the problems. That certainly was experienced by myself. And if you're linking it directly to the gambling behaviours, I think, look, let's take Sandro Tonali as an example. Why would a £100,000 plus a week Premier League footballer make the decision to bet on a sport he knows he can't legally do? And since it all came out, he came out as a gambling addict. And I think it's all around the secrecy of that and the decision making, the moral compass all comes together. And it just creates a really difficult concoction of not wanting to get yourself in trouble, not wanting to appear like you haven't got your shit together, for want of a better word, and the inability for, in many ways, grown men to talk to each other about things that they've got going on in the background. Because for me, that was always the case. It was just never a time where I felt comfortable going to somebody and saying, listen, I'm in trouble here, because I didn't want to come across as weak, unsuccessful, a loser, all of the things that you would attribute to sport. So there is an element of that. Totally agree.
I sorry, 2 seconds, Pedro. I also wonder whether the stress of being an elite level athlete plays a role in that, because I can imagine, I'm a big tennis fan myself, and I can imagine when you see a promising player sustain an injury that puts them out for 12 months or more, the stress of having to try and regain your momentum and reposition yourself coming back, the stress of the frustration of being out and nothing you can do about it. And then you've got the other aspects that you've touched on, where we're talking about team selection and contracts, and I can only envision that is extremely high stress, waiting to find out whether you're going to have a job next year, whether you're going to be one of the players that's selected to participate, or whether you're benched and that's the start of a downslide in your career. I would have thought that those sorts of extreme pressures make for unfortunate cocktail when gambling's available.
Absolutely. I think, look, to any level of, I think the biggest issue around, and I've had a lot of conversations with elite athletes who've done education programs for, and the one that struck me the most was a conversation with a rugby player that was at a club that was struggling at the time. He said the way they treated injured players isn't what he particularly enjoyed, because injured players become a commodity that is essentially not useful to that club. So you end up getting the worst physio times. You're hanging around the club because you can't play, train, be around all the boys all the time. So you essentially then start to feel left out. You then have all the insecurities of not playing, worrying about what that might have impact-wise on your contracts. You're not getting what you need in terms of the competitive drivers, the adrenaline, the buzz replication of playing, because like there is nothing better in this world for me than the feeling of winning as part of a team. It is probably what keeps most people playing sport, whether that is to a community level, a semi-pro level, or an elite level, is that's why people do what they do. And the higher up the echelon you go in terms of elite level, the more pressure that creates. So when you're injured, all that pressure comes on, all the stress comes on, all of the things that you need from sport as a competitive being aren't there. So it creates a situation where you're dealing with so much stress and pressure that it's really easy to look for things to either numb down that feeling or to give you what you're currently not getting. So you're right, it's a difficult thing to manage, and having understood it from that perspective of having suffered a couple of big injuries as well and being competitive, to understand how hard that is and how that impacted my sort of ability to bet recreationally, how it may impacted my ability to perform daily duties, or impacted my decision making or my moral compass. All of it was linked and is linked today to kind of who you are and what you are. And if you're involved in sport, you will always have that element of competitive nature, because if you don't, the likelihood is you won't be very successful. So it's a fine balance between, well, I guess look at most top end sports now. I've got any number of sports psychologists involved in camp to help people understand all these things, and betting and understanding the relationships is very much part of conversations you would assume that go on. Dealing with injuries, dealing with issues outside sport, dealing with contracts, moving away, all of those things that from the outside looking in from a fan, I guess people very rarely have sympathy for high-end sportsmen, because it's like, well, I would love to be in their position. But actually, if you're in it, and having seen a lot of it in the last 10 years of work in this industry, it's not always as easy or as nice as it looks from the external.
Mark, I wanted to ask you, did you ever have any concussion playing rugby?
I mean, I've been knocked out a couple of times. Yeah, I've had a few injuries. Yeah, I was knocked out cold once when I did my neck. Offhand, I think 3 times I've probably had concussion. Brain injury is massive at the moment in sport, obviously, and the NFL and rugby league, rugby union, or even football in terms of heading the ball. The conversations are going down the line of how do we protect from head injuries, because if you look at some of the litigation that's going on, if you look at some of the things that are being developed, like things that are terrible, like MND, like early onset dementia, there's a disproportionate amount of athletes dealing with that at the moment. So obviously having to understand brain injuries and all of that, I think plays a part in it. And I guess what you might be getting at is, would that potentially have played a part in your decision making and kind of relationships with gambling? I don't know. I would guess that there were a number of factors involved, and it may have been one.
Because I've read a paper somewhere, I cannot mention it, but I think it was saying that, people that they get concussion, like sport people, they are like 3 times more likely to develop, problematic gambling and, this type of behaviors, and you get all the time a bit of a romantic narrative of, because they're risk seekers, because, there's also something that, maybe, there's not that much interest to talk about, because, okay, maybe, your club didn't protect you, or you didn't have at the time, the medical support. It's something that you see, that, sometimes, some sport people, they seem to be more, or at least they are a little bit more in the spotlight. They tend to be footballers, rugby players, or that's my sort of experience. That sometimes you get other type of players. But it feels particularly in the live experience that there's some more prevalent sports. That people they have suffered from problematic gambling. I don't know. Just brainstorming here.
I've certainly read. I couldn't say it was a paper, but I've certainly read something and recently suggesting links between concussions and gambling harm. I think the brain's such a complex thing, and we are only scratching the surface of our understanding of how it works and what it does. I mean, in fact, extend that way beyond the brain. The body is such a complex thing, and we are still very rudimentary in our understanding about how everything fits together and all the different processes that different things in your body do. Small changes can make big differences.
I also wanted to ask you, a thing, because you talk about that big jackpot, because I have listened to you like multiple times over the years, and I remember that you talk about that, horse racing bet that you put 15 pounds and you got like 14K, and I wonder, what do you think would have happened if you didn't get that bet?
Do you know what? It's a great question, and I think plays into the narrative that circumstances, environments, opportunity, individual composition plays a massive part in sort of how journeys play out. Because if I didn't play competitive sports, if I didn't suffer a long-term injury, if I don't win 14 grand on the certain day, things probably would have been different. So it's hard to say that a certain, like, I was never marketed and advertised to at the beginning. I think it was more where I found myself and the things I found myself having to deal with, one of them was a significant win and a lack of awareness and understanding about what that meant. Well, I thought it was the best day of my life. I rang all my mates. I was like, come on, my God, I've won all this money. Let's go out. I'll take you all drinking. I'll pay for it. And didn't have an understanding of what that meant in terms of risk as how I would view it the day after. And I think how I viewed it the day after was the biggest thing, because I just saw all this money, no risk, not my money, already took some money out and had my money's worth so I can do what I want with the rest. And then it creates the scenario, like I said, the increased stakes, increased products, play with different things, play with less risk attached. And it creates a scenario that you think, this is unbelievable. The buzz and adrenaline of having 500 quid on a horse is very different than having £2 or £3 on a horse. So I think all of that becomes then more exciting, and you have to deal with that. But I completely agree with everything you're saying. Essentially, is I think circumstance, environments, all of that play a massive part. Dealing with adversity, I think, is kind of what we were on about there. Whether it's concussion or injuries, like I've had 4 knee operations in the last 2 years, and 44 years of age with a new knee now. If that would have been 15 years ago, there is no way that I would have been able to deal with that without it causing me significant harm or problems and me looking for other things to do. Fortunately now, because I'm in a position where I understand myself, what makes me tick, what my triggers are, I'm able to deal with that and sort of manage it in a better way. Like, people still have to deal with adversity. When I stopped playing rugby, I was mid to late 30s. I wasn't ready to stop being a competitive human being at that stage. Mm-hmm. So I went back to playing cricket, which I loved and enjoyed and still do to this day. I now have to stop doing that. And all of those things are hard, but I think learning how to deal with them in a better way is so much more healthy. And learning that things can go wrong and it's okay for things to go wrong, and that's normal. I think where I have some of the issues around now, some of the sort of the anti-gambling sort of lobbyists, if you like, is I feel like there's quite a lot that are tied up in it's still bitter about their experience. I think if you can't get over that, if you can't find a way of saying, look, I played a massive part in what I did, absolutely, there probably could and should have been some more protections in place. But if I can't work out who I am, what I am, and what my triggers are, then it's highly unlikely that I'm going to be able to get past certain feelings, scenarios, environments going forward. And I think that's probably the one thing that I think frustrates me the most currently, is that is there enough support for people who need it, and are they getting the right support? But also, are they kind of being used as pawns in a bit of a political game, that in terms of what's currently going on? And I'm not a massive fan of that. I'm a big fan of understanding where you got to and why you got there, and accessing all the networks available to truly understand yourself. And then if you can go on and we can make some improvements to the industry, that's great. Obviously, that's always needed. But I think the biggest thing around recovery is understanding you and yourself. And I think accepting what has previously gone on needs to change, and sort of not looking to lay the blame squarely at the feet of others.
I think that you touch on a number of subjects there. Again, my experience interacting with those harmed by gambling has been consistent. I have yet to meet somebody who has been significantly harmed by gambling who did not, at some point early on, experience a substantial win. And that is tends to be the tipping point where the way they engage with gambling changes. But as you're absolutely right in saying it's circumstantial. And so much of addiction, and I've had many conversations with Pedro and his work with interacting and helping people who are impacted by various forms of addiction. It's rare for addiction to occur by itself. There are generally other traumas behind the addiction. And that kind of, there's no addiction without vulnerability. Is kind of, I think, the point. A totally tangential sort of story, but just yesterday I was reading a news article talking about the prevalence of sociopaths in society. New study highlighting that actually, this is, I mean, quite a big study. This reviewed over 180,000 people, I believe, and there were a far higher occurrence of sociopathic type behaviours in demographically poorer communities. And in demographically poorer communities, you have higher levels of trauma, higher levels of competitiveness, because people don't have the comfort of sitting back. Quite honestly, I think the best thing we can do if we want to reduce these sorts of addictive occurrences is to help raise people up. It's a very wide conversation topic.
You know what? Absolutely. I think, look, statistically, there's, you say, in the poorer demographics, the people tend to have higher levels of risk. I think if you're doing something to try and get yourself out of the scenario, and I've felt that because I had lost all of my money, I hadn't paid certain things. There was a desperation to that I felt, meaning I carried on betting because I needed to. I think that might be relatable to sort of demographics like that. Saying if they're trying to win to sort of improve their lives, there might be some correlation to that also. But one person's £5 is another person's £5,000, right? So it's all different. It's all relative. But I think the general rule of thumb of what you're saying is that I felt it. There was, when I didn't have anything, there was a desperation to have something because I needed it to pay certain things to be able to live. So I would agree that there is correlation, and the more people you can lift up and the more people you can help and the better off society is, then the more chance people have got.
We certainly we certainly saw the same thing, Pedro, when we were talking to Gabriel from Gamble Aware Nigeria, and him talking about the number of people in the Nigerian population who are betting as a way out because they don't see any other economic way forward.
I mean, the tougher, your life is, the more vulnerable you're going to be, So if you're like in a situation of poverty, abuse, trauma, you're going to be more vulnerable. If you're in a really settled situation, and okay, so imagine that, you play rugby and you have a counselor and you talk about, my girlfriend is pregnant, I don't know if I'm going to be able to be at their twins. Oh my God, my hair is falling, I'm all anxious, probably you're going to be able, but if you keep it all in, you're stressed, the bills are piling up, it's okay, I don't know if I'm ready, this is a really tough situation, so I
think,
I mean,
maybe I suppose the more desperate you are, the more likely you are to make more risky choices and decisions, right? So, and I listened to that episode, and that it kind of struck me that is I felt it to obviously a very different level and to a different extent and in a different situation. But I have felt that the more desperate you become, the worse decisions you tend to make and the more risky decisions you tend to make. So I absolutely, completely agree with that there is, again, probably something that needs to be done in that scenario to, whether it's raise awareness or help people understand, or
It's,
yeah.
I mean, we really are extending the problem to a global level when we start talking about eliminating poverty. That might be beyond the scope of anything that the three of us are engaged in. But yes, broadly, reducing social deprivation, being more aware of triggering factors and high stress factors that are likely to put somebody at risk. And I think that's where your work around sports professional athletes is really important, because this is a particularly vulnerable subset. And I'm not necessarily of the mind that the club has to take responsibility so much as just care, look out. You understand that these young people are vulnerable, and make sure you have some mechanisms in place to support them and to try and ensure that they don't go down a bad path when things like injury crop up, when the approaching stress of selection is looming. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's probably important to understand. I think most sporting environments now are significantly better than they were years ago. They have support network. They're creating scenarios where people can have these conversations. They're having the right people in there to have the conversations. I think the one connector to the betting side of things is, in an ideal world, they need to have people that understand the subject matter. So if you understand the subject matter alongside all of the supportive networks that you've got, and I think that's why some of the education programs are quite successful, is because they have the relevant support networks. They just don't necessarily know how to connect that to the specific subject of betting, of whatever else it may be. And I think the more understanding and specialists they have in that area, then the better things will be. But the support networks are there now in sport. It's just the specialised subject matter that needs probably some work. And that's kind of, I suppose, why we're kind of doing what we're doing and helping people understand that and helping people have the right information, the right literature, the right context as to why the people in their care may be more vulnerable to this due to who they are, what they are, the circumstances, the environments they put in, all the associated risks around integrity and athletes getting abused from bettors, etc., etc. So I think the more information they have, the better they'll be able to deal with it as a subject.
I have a bit of a difficult question. If you don't want to answer, feel free. What happened in the expert by experience community when someone relapses? Because relapse is quite common. And I suppose if someone have been telling the story of recovery and then they have a relapse, it must be like much more stigmatizing.
I think there's an element to that, and this is why I'm so big on people understanding themselves and understanding who they are, what makes them tick, and what their triggers are. Because I think what you see is there's a lot of people that very new to recovery want to save the world, and that's really admirable. And it's right now. I don't want anybody to suffer the same things that I have. But actually, what they haven't done is took the time to look after themselves first. And I think if you take the time to do that, rather than projecting it on everybody else and saying, well, listen, I've suffered from this and I want, and that usually comes from a place of emotion. I think if you can take the emotion away and have a significant period of time where you look after you and you get the support and help that you need, in time, that is what's going to be productive for you to help other people, rather than just saying, well, I've stopped. I recognize all the harm that I was caused by X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to now campaign for this. I believe that creates a sort of unhealthy scenario where people are trying to project a level of bitterness that they still carry because they've not fully understood everything that goes into it. And that is unhealthy to project to others. I think for me, the best conversations I have now are not about telling people what to do and what not to do, because that's not for me to decide. It's, I can share my experience, but I can also share how my decision-making ability and my understanding of who I was and what I was and why those played a massive part into where I got to was the case, and how that now changes over time and how you choose to react differently to adversity, for example, because ultimately the relapses for me are around either not being fully understanding of yourself, being in a scenario where desperation is created again, whether that's around money or relationships or whatever, or being stuck in the cycle of blame. And I think for me, the more people that can truly understand themselves before they try and help other people is probably the way to go. And I think it's finding the balance, isn't it, between not having people like myself who have been out of it for 15 years now, having people who understand the current landscape, but also know themselves and know how to change. Because I think the biggest thing is knowing how to change. Because if you don't, we can just take gambling away and replace it with something else, right? If you've not changed who you are as a human being, we can take betting away and obsessions become social media, alcohol, sex, drugs, whatever. I think it's very rarely is actually gambling is the root cause of what the problem is. There's a lot of associated things. You're just using that as the vehicle to come away from other things that either aren't going particularly well or you're not very good at dealing with. So I think that's probably where we need to get to, is a place where rather than people jumping at the deep end trying to save the world, which is absolutely admirable, it's taking the time to help themselves first, understand themselves, get the right support, and then recommend the right support to others. And then you're in a position where you can have a sensible conversation with an element of a broad picture of all of the elements that go into it, rather than just, I've stopped, I need to project, if that makes sense.
It's it does. It's very, very interesting and complex. Response. I'm conscious of the time. And we recently, BetTALker and I see 360, we got into a partnership in Massachusetts. So could you tell us a little bit? I mean, I know it, but
Well,
I mean, as you know, I was a big promoter of you guys and have been for a while. When that came about, I was quite quick to kind of speak to Eric and say, look, I think these guys would be great to partner with. For me, it's look, the USA has been worked in it for the last 3 years. It's the kind of growth quite quickly into a massive industry. The fight for market position, all of those sort of things, meaning we're still looking at things like open account, deposit $5 and get $300 or $400 free. So there's things that are going on in the US that aren't now still going on in the UK that we've learned from, addressed, probably still need to address some of those things. So for me, it's getting this and the likes of of your service and others in place now in the US across what is a big state, how can that not be helpful before we start having to see people like me popping up everywhere in the USA going, well, I gambled for X amount of time. These are all the really negative things that happened because I didn't understand what I was doing. I didn't understand myself, and there was no outlet to be able to either block some software, get some support, have some education. So for me, it's like an absolute no-brainer that there was a partnership able to happen that can promote this service that will help people
I
get where they
totally
need to
agree.
get or better understand themselves.
I totally agree with you on so many aspects of what you were just saying. Yes, the promotions offered by the US gambling operators. I don't know how they're not getting taken apart by bonus abusers at this stage, because if you offered those promotions anywhere in Europe, they would be devastating to the operator's bottom line. But that put to the side, yeah, I mean this was an absolute no-brainer. I see 360 have an already established brand reputation within the US markets. BetTALker is looking to prioritize the US and the coming months and years. We have the solution that Massachusetts was looking for, and IC360 have the voice and the megaphone to get that solution on the airwaves and out to the people that need it. It was just an obvious, all right, this is a win for all of us. Why not work together?
Absolutely. Do you know what? I think there's actually problem. That's one thing that people across the industry could get better at is recognizing that partnering with other people who do good work is a good thing. And I think there's probably not been enough of that, whether that is fighting for position or worrying about funding or any of those things, especially obviously we've seen what's gone in the UK. I think partnering with people who do things that can enhance your thing is an absolute no-brainer to me. It's like there is no competition between what we do and what you do. They just enhance each other. So for me, that is one thing that I do get quite frustrated about sometimes is people's inability to partner, because I don't know whether they think it takes some of the shine off some of the things they do, or whether they think it's a funding issue. I think, why wouldn't you do something that enhances both of your organisations and for the people that you're trying to represent and help?
The UK is a specific bugbear for me. Honestly, I mean, yes, I'm frustrated with the approach of the authorities and the structures being set up. There's a lot of flaws there. But if the rec sector's honest, there's been a lot of problems with the way that the rec sector has engaged with this as well. If we had stopped fighting against each other and simply come together and say, well, this is what we have in common, rather than focusing on, well, this is where we might compete and this is where we view things differently. If we'd focused on what we had in common and started working together and speaking together, we would have had a really powerful voice in the conversation about how the levy was managed. Instead, we have acted individually, been divided in what we were trying to achieve, and so we were easily sidelined and ignored by the people who had a stake in seeing us ignored. It is a huge tragedy, in my opinion.
Agreed, 100%. I think we've hit the nail on the head, haven't we? There's a number of reasons why that has occurred, and it is just it's a shame. It is what it is. It's a shame that it had to get to a scenario where that is the case. However, why should we not create something different in the US or the UAE or Brazil or wherever else. So why not learn from what has essentially been quite a lot of mistakes, and quite a lot of infighting, backbiting, all of those things that are just fundamentally not productive, and do things like this where we can partner with good people and with good products that have some crossover. So it's just a no-brainer. For me, it's just a no-brainer. And it was something that as soon as I heard about it, I was like, well, we should definitely do this, because why wouldn't we?
Exactly. I've spent a lot of time in recent months talking to people in various PR roles within the sector. And one thing's really stood out to me, and that is none of them are even vaguely interested in a negative or combative narrative. They want positivity. It doesn't matter what the organization is, the person in charge of PR doesn't want any sort of negativity at all. Keep away from that. Promote your strengths. Don't attack other people's weaknesses. And I think the rec sector really needs to learn that lesson. We are all far stronger working together, not just in our voice in the political conversation. Yes, that would have been really good, especially over the last 2 years. But we can deliver far better support to the people that need us if we work together. And we're letting people down by keeping all these other organizations at arm's length as we try to protect our own little bit of turf. It's not working.
I think with that bombshell, we can finish the podcast for today. No, guys?
Yeah, sounds good, Pedro. Sounds good. It has been an absolute delight to speak to you today, Mark. Thank you for making the time for us.
Thank you, guys.
Welcome, man.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, guys. See you soon.